All right, this is my second time doing this particular recording. I forgot to turn on the record button before class started, so I wanted to go over this again. Um, what I wanted to talk about primarily was just I don't have a lot to talk about. We got through all the material on Tuesday, but I did want to talk about checkpoint zero. Um, on Tuesday, we came up with a lot of different topics or several different topics. And I wanted to find a way to include them in this week's discussion. I hate to keep going back to and say in other semesters, but in other semesters this would have been a topic of discussion, and we would have led off the class today with an open discussion, and I could have pointed at you guys and made or pressured you to actually say something on the topics. But we can't do that because it's much harder to do that remotely like we're doing. So I just wanted to point out that checkpoint zero exists. What I want here is I want some kind of discussion about topics that are actually pretty important to open source. Three things happened. Well, MongoDB happened a few years ago. They changed their license from, I believe it was AGPL to server-side public license. Server-side public license is not an open source license. So that's a big change, and it impacted the entire ecosystem. So it impacted contributors who had contributed without pay to MongoDB, the development of MongoDB. It impacted employees. It impacted other businesses who had been using MongoDB. It impacted users who wanted to use MongoDB. So there were a lot of changes that kind of resulted from this. And we talked about a lot of these, or I exposited about a lot of these in class on Tuesday, and I want you guys to kind of take a thought on your own. I didn't get a lot of feedback from students because this is not a good mechanism for that. So I want you guys to kind of to form some thoughts about, or one of the possibilities is to form some thoughts about that. There are other possibilities as well. Richard Stallman was forced off of the Free Software Foundation board. That happened a year ago, essentially, I think. And now he is just recently announced that he's back on the board. There were some reasons for that. I posted a number of articles in our Discord. You're welcome to read about that. I'm not really as interested in the salacious details of it, at least not for this particular assignment. You don't have to take a stand on any of that. What I'm interested in is he was a prickly personality before, and yet he managed to form the GNU software. He was essentially the driving force behind GNU and free software. And now he's been forced off the board and he's back on again. And all of this kind of goes against some of the guidelines we've been giving you on how to build and maintain and sustain open source communities under the understanding that open source communities are essentially, you can walk away whenever you want. Right? There's no one keeping you there other than yourself in general. So, it would be interesting to hear some insights on your thoughts on that. And the other one is there was a recent decision in the Supreme Court, and this is a case that's been going on for a number of years, over a decade. Google and Oracle have been fighting about the interface to Java. Oracle saying Google stole their code illegally. I guess stealing and illegal go together. But that was Oracle's claim, and Google was saying that what they did was they took interface code, and interfaces have to be publicly available. They can't be something that an individual company can control. And this was initially resolved in favor of Google years ago. And in that case, the judge essentially said that well, you can't copyright an API. Basically, any API. At least the way I like to think about it is the .h files in your C or C++. A public API, you can't copyright because that's how people have to talk to it, and there are only a limited number of ways. Right? If you get that wrong, it's wrong. There are only a limited number of ways to put that together correctly and actually have access to the underlying functionality. That was appealed. It was overturned on appeal. And, over the next decade, more or less, it kind of inched its way up through the lower courts and into the Supreme Court. In an interesting turn, our most recent justice wasn't there for the argument, so there were only 8 justices voting. It was a 6-2 decision in favor of Google. But they did not address whether APIs are copyrightable or not. At least in my initial reading of the decision, they didn't address whether APIs are copyrightable. What they said was, let's assume they're copyrightable. If we assume they're copyrightable, the question is this fair use? And ultimately, the decision was, yeah, it's fair use to take an API and duplicate it, copy it. So that doesn't address whether it's copyrightable or not. The assumption is it may in fact be copyrightable, but it does mean that the exception to copyright law is you are allowed to use things that fall within fair use exemptions to copyright law. So even if it is copyrightable, you can still use it in the manner Google did to access the functionality of a piece of code. Interesting. We said it was 6-2. The 2 people who dissented, I think that it was written by Thomas. Victoria tells me that it was both 6-2, and Amy Coney Bryant, I think, was the one who was out. And she also tells me that it was Thomas and Alito who wrote the dissent. So thank you, Victoria. The interesting part of this is the dissent, where it says that using the interface is fair use, but stealing the code is still stealing the code. And what they referred to was the fact that other companies faced with the same situation did not steal that piece of code from Oracle. Instead, they rewrote it, and they rewrote it based on, I presume, white box or black, clean room procedures, where you have one group of people who can look at the code and another group of people who can't look at the code. And the people who can look at the code write the specification for the people who can't look at the code, and then the people who can't look at the code completely rewrite it. Google didn't do that. Google took the code directly, apparently. So anyway, it was an interesting case. It has some profound impacts on software in general, and I think open source in particular. What do I want from you guys? Well, you're supposed to be writing a blog. Continue writing your blog. This week, make the blog about one of these topics. Or at least have a paragraph in there about one of these topics. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. You can you can have a very narrow blog that looks only at the impact on the change in Mongo's license to outside contributors. Fine. I do want a well-formed paragraph. I want a clear statement, a thesis for the paragraph. I want clearly and well-supported details about your thesis, right? Say something, back it up, give me a conclusion. It's not one line. It's probably not 2 lines. It's somewhere between a tweet and your biography. You don't have to go beyond a paragraph, but you do have to give me a good paragraph. All right? And when you're done, just put a link to that in your lab report. Anyway, that should see you through. Thank you for your time, and good luck with the lab. I think this is a really fun one. I enjoyed doing. I've enjoyed thinking about these topics. I will admit to not having written anything, but I thought about the topics and I ran through the lab, and everything was a lot of fun. So, thank you.